Welcome to our third tutorial in the Introduction to Programming Using Python series. Today we're going to learn about Python arithmetic and comparison operators. Then we'll introduce variables and expand on strings, which we briefly introduced last time. We'll start with the arithmetic operators, which work the same way in Python they do in your calculator. These operators look the same except for the asterisk, which in Python is used for multiplication. Let's try these out in idle. So you can add numbers, divide numbers, multiply numbers using the asterisk, and subtract, right? You can also use double slashes for divisor function or floor division. So 21 divided by 10 is 2. Or as you can see here more clearly, 21 divided by 2 would give you the floor division of 10 instead of 10.5, which is what you would get with a single slash. Double asterisk is for power, and the percent sign is for the remainder. So 21% 2 would be 1 because that would be the remainder. Now operator precedence works the same way as you would expect. So basically multiplication and division come before addition and subtraction. So 1 plus 2 times 3 would be 7, not 9. But it's best to always use brackets. That way you avoid any confusion. Comparison operators compare the two things on either side and give you a true or false answer. For now, we're going to use number examples, but the same holds true for other Python objects like strings. So for example, if I go 5 equal 6, it'll give me false. 5 equal 5 is true. And the first thing you'll notice here is that we're using a double equal to check the equality of two things instead of a single equal. The reason for that is the single equal is used as the assignment operator. So basically, a single equal would assign a value to a variable, which we're going to see later. So to check if two things are equal, you have to use the equal. 5 less than 6 is true, 5 less than 5 false. So a lot of times we're going to do 5 less than or equal to 5, this kind of check. Now, I'd like you to, in idle, please experiment with these so that you know exactly how they work. These comparison operators are going to be important when we get to conditional statements and while loops as well. Now, there are other Python operators, but for now, they're not going to be relevant to us because we're just beginning to learn to program. So we may talk about them when we get to them. For now, these are the two types of operators you'll need to use, the arithmetic and the comparison. Please give them a try in idle. Now we're going to talk about variables because it's an essential part of any programming language. We saw in the previous slide that we can use numbers and operators to do basic arithmetic, and we saw that Python would give us the answers in idle. But what if we wanted to save those results for later use? Or what if there was a value we wanted to use over and over in our program? It doesn't make sense for us to redefine it. For these cases, we use variables to hold results or values we want to use later. Variables are essentially labels that point to the values we want. So to look at an example, go to idle and type x equals 5 and click enter. And what we just did here is we created a variable called x and we assigned the value 5 to it. And if we click x, enter, idle would show us the value stored in the label or the variable called x. So for example, if I were to go 5 times 4, it would give me 20. If I were to type x times 4, it would also give me 20 because x is just a pointer to the value of 5. Now, again, we mentioned the single equal is the assignment operator. That's why we can't use it for comparison of equality. Assignment means I take the value on the right side and I assign it to the label or the variable name on the left side. Now I can only assign to variable names. I can't assign to other values. I can't go 5 equals 6. This won't work and Python would complain. And again, there is no harm in trying. There is no harm in experimentation. Experimentation, it's free and it gives you a lot of experience and you'll learn that way. Now, generally speaking, variable names should start with a lowercase letter and they should have meaningful names. This is a matter of convention, but we usually should give something meaningful, a meaningful name to the variable so that we know what it represents later on in the program when we use it. So if I wanted to, let's say, have a variable that has the number of milliseconds in a day, I shouldn't call it num or n or something that doesn't mean anything later on or to somebody else who may be looking at your code. So if I wanted number of milliseconds in a day, I would go something like this, number millis in day. Now, like I said, as a matter of convention, first character is lowercase, and you can only start a variable name with an underscore or a character. You can't start with numbers. After the first character, you can have numbers as well. You can't have spaces, hyphens, or anything else. Now, every subsequent word, if we have a multi-word variable name, as in this case, again, as a matter of convention, we uppercase the first letter of that. So the M in millis, the I in N, and the D in day. So we go equal 24 hours, 60 minutes, 60 seconds, 1000 milliseconds. And you can start to see here why we would want to use a variable, because if I didn't have this variable, I would have to do this calculation every time I wanted to use that number. And now that we've defined it, I can use it in other calculations or elsewhere in the program. So I can use it, for example, to define another one, which is number of millis in a week. So instead of going 24 times 60 times 60 times 1000 times 7, I can go 7 times millis in day. And this is a very basic look at variables. Now we have seen strings before, and now we're going to talk about them in a bit more details. As we mentioned before, strings are basically text, which in Python has to be wrapped in single quotes or double quotes. And these are up to you which one you use. So in idle, if you were to type John Smith in single quotes and hit enter, idle will show you the value that you have just typed, which is John Smith. If you were to do the same in double quotes, you're going to see that it takes it exactly the same, and internally it represents it with a single quote. Now, strings have to be defined on a single line, so you can't do something like this, John, and hit enter, thinking that you're going to define Smith on the second line. Python would complain. If you start a string with a quote, the ending quote has to be on the same line. Now, there is a way to define multi-line strings, and that's to use triple single quotes or triple double quotes. So let's say we define a variable s, and to that variable we start with triple quotes, and here we can go this string, and we can hit enter, and now Python is not complaining, is a multi-enter line string, and we end it with triple quotes. Now if we were to print s, we will see that multi-line string has been assigned to the variable s. Now if you were to type s and enter without the print, it would show you the internal representation, because the new line internally is represented with /n. Okay, so this is just an FYI if you were to see this. If you were to type it by itself and you see \n, just so you know what it is, it represents a new line, so that when you print it, it prints like that. We can also add strings, just like we can add numbers, so the plus operation works on strings. So to illustrate that, let's say we had a first name variable assigned to string value of John, and last name assigned to Smith. We can use that to create a new variable by going first name plus last name, right? And that works. And if we were to print full name, it would give us John Smith. And notice that Python did not add a space for you because it doesn't know that you want it. It won't add any logic for you that you don't tell it to. So John doesn't have a space, Smith, there's no space, so it doesn't add any spaces between them. So if you want a space, we have to add it ourselves. So here's a string with just one space. We can add it between the first name and the last name. And now if we print full name, we have John Smith with the space we want in the middle. Now sometimes we have a message that we want to replace a piece of this message depending on the situation. So for example, we might want to say, my message is welcome name, and so depending on whatever name I have, I want to say welcome name to Python programming. And what I really want is, I don't want to change and have a different message for every different name. So I don't want to have John Smith message, Dave Smith message, and so on and so forth for every name. I want to have one message that I can reuse over and over. So how do I do that? I can do something like this. Let's say the name was John. I can basically say message equals welcome and add name, right? Because we saw that we can add strings. So I can do that. And now if I print my message, it says welcome John to Python programming. So I can basically define a message prefix, a message postfix, and I can add the three portions, the prefix, the name, and the postfix, every time I want to print a message for a different name. And that works, but there is a better way in Python, and the way to do that would be define a message template. So welcome, and I can put a placeholder that I want replaced later, and I can do that by going %s inside the string. S here denotes a string. So I can go %s, and this basically tells Python that here I'd like to replace this with something that I will provide at a later point in time. So I can do something like this. And now, whenever I want to print the actual message to the end user for a different name, I can do something like this. Print message. And here, when I told Python that I'd like to replace this, when I come to want to print it or do something with it where I want the final product, the actual message with the name, I go the message template and then %, and then I put the string that I want replaced inside the original message where the %s was. So I go message, the string template variable, %, and then the replacement part or parts, in this case name. And if I go enter, you can see here that Python, what it did is it looked for the %s and it replaced it with the variable name that I gave it. And this is how you do basic string formatting. And this allows us to do more than one. So basically, you might be thinking, well, you know, adding a prefix and the name and the postfix to the message works just the same. And in this particular case, maybe. But here I can start doing more than one. So I can go welcome. And let's say here I'd like to put the name to, and maybe I want the programming language itself to be a variable, to be something that I can replace later, right? So here I would have had to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different pieces in the addition. And this looks a lot better, and it's easier for us to understand and to use. So now I can go print. And if I have more than one, so what I did before is message %name. But now I have name, and let's say language. So let's define a language variable, right? So now I have name and language, and I'd like to print the formatted message with these. So if you have more than one, if you had one, you would go %name. When you have more than one, after the %, you have to use brackets to surround the multiple variables that you're putting for replacement. So you go name, comma, language, and you hit enter, and you can see here that it formatted the string template for us with the replacements, with the replacement parts we gave it. Now, again, I mentioned that the S here stands for string. So this is for string, and we have other options like numbers. It can format decimals for us and so on. But we'll get to those maybe later. Please experiment with this formatting and replacing portions of the string using the string formatting. Again, you can actually put this in another variable, so I can go John message if I need that for some reason. And I can go message, and again, I'm replacing multiple parts, so they have to go in brackets. And now if I look at the John message, you see that it's the resulting string with the replacement parts inside the original template. And the template, of course, doesn't change. We're going to be using string formatting a lot, so please experiment with it. As an exercise, please go ahead and try string formatting. So create two variables, one that points to your first name and one that points to your last name, again, just like we saw in the previous slide. Create a string with placeholders, like I showed you before, for your first name and your last name, and print out the results, so the template with the replacement parts. Okay, so if your name is John Smith, then the string when printed with the placeholder should look like, "Hi there, John Smith." Please give that a try. Next time, we're going to start looking at how we can gather user input. Until then.